Well, hello, everybody. I'm Bobby Ross, editor-in-chief of the Christian Chronicle. I'm joined by a couple of minister friends that I've known for, I guess, about 15 years now. Just a few months after I joined the Christian Chronicle in 2005. I started in May of 2005, and the event we're going to talk about happened at the end of August 2005. And I think that may have been when I met both of you or soon thereafter. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves and tell a little bit about who you are, and then we'll talk a little bit about Hurricane Katrina.
Okay, my name is John Dobbs. I'm preaching minister at Forsyth Church of Christ in Monroe, Louisiana. But 15 years ago, I was a preaching minister at Central Church of Christ in Pascagoula, Mississippi, which was a big recipient of Katrina's wrath during that time.
And I'm Les Ferguson, Jr. I'm the preaching minister at the Oxford Church of Christ in Oxford, Mississippi. And 15 years ago, I was the preaching minister at the Orange Grove Church of Christ in Gulfport. John and I both lived about, 30 minutes apart?
Mm-hmm.
And we did relief work there together on the coast for, seemed like forever.
Wow. How long have you two guys known each other? I guess you've known each other forever.
18, 17.
Yeah, when I was 17 years old, I went to Magnolia Bible College, and I met Les, who's significantly older than me. And his dad was the minister for a lot of people in my mom's side of the family in Vicksburg, and so I already knew he was there and was kind of looking to meet him, and we've been good friends ever since.
Oh, that's great.
Been through a lot of tough stuff together.
Yes.
So, John, what do you remember about Hurricane Katrina, I guess, leading up to the storm and then what happened there in Pascagoula?
You know, it's interesting to me. I was thinking back about that in preparation for today, and it occurred to me that in preparation for Katrina, I had no clue. I mean, we were watching the Weather Channel. We didn't have, we didn't have Facebook and a lot of the connections. But I did not conceive at all of the immensity of the storm. But when I moved to Pascagoula, I told the leadership there that I do not stay for storms. That I leave and I will come back, but I don't stay. And so I got some teasing over the years of heading out of town when there were some minor hurricanes approaching, but nobody teased me about heading out of town for Katrina. We went to my wife's parents, who are both now deceased, but we went up to Mississippi Delta and watched on television as the whole thing unfolded. And we had a few texts. You could get a text out, not a phone call, but we had a few texts that everything south of Highway 90 was gone. It was kind of hard to believe, but that's what we were operating on. Gas was in short supply. So we made our way to Pensacola to Danny Dodd's house and spent a night, and then came over the next day to see the damage in Pascagoula. So that was sort of our moment of awakening. It was a couple of days later, but it was quite an experience.
And what about your experience in Gulf Shores, Les?
Gulfport.
Gulfport. I knew I was going to mess that up before I said it.
That's the landmass to the other side of us. I started really worrying about this hurricane the day before, or the Saturday before it hit on Monday morning. And I remember trying to convince leadership to not have services. We did worship first and then Sunday school after. By Sunday morning, they decided to call off Sunday school. We had worship and sent people home immediately after that. And I went to my house and started I had never boarded up windows before. I started trying to board up windows. I was not convinced that we were going to leave. And while I was outside with a man from church doing this, I remember hearing the weather say that the wind was up to, I think, 165 or 175 miles an hour. and that kind of did it. So we packed up. That family, the man that was helping me, his family went with us, and we drove about 2.5 hours north to Kosciuszko, to where my parents lived, and spent the night there. That Sunday night, the storm hit Monday morning. On Tuesday morning, we got back in our vehicles and made our way south. They actually had 49, which was the natural roadway for us to get home on, blocked, and so we took back roads and scooted around down toward. We actually stopped at the camp, John, at Gulf Coast Bible Camp for a few minutes, but we scooted our way on into Gulfport. And I'll never forget driving down I-10 coming from Gaucher Van Cleve area toward Gulfport, and the opposite side of the interstate in Gulfport was covered in debris. I mean, appliances, refrigerators, stoves, washers, just covered in debris. And at that point, I was terrified that we wouldn't even have a house. But we had one side of our house, all the siding was gone. The ridge vent across the whole roof of the house was gone. But no water ever got in. So it was a scary time.
It was
full of lots of uncertainty.
I think the amazing thing to me, being a journalist and having reported, being from Oklahoma and having reported on a number of tornadoes over the years, you're used to like an isolated area where it looks really bad, but it's just like a 1 or 2 mile stretch, or maybe, a little bit longer. But this was a case where you could go on one side of New Orleans all the way into Mississippi for miles and miles and miles, and it was destruction everywhere. And I apologize that I forgot to turn my phone off if y'all are hearing that in the background. But I think one memory that I have, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, you were both in Mississippi, and I think a lot of the national attention on the news was New Orleans, because obviously you're dealing with a major American city where things got really bad and some levees broke, and obviously there was a need for attention there. But it seemed like maybe people had less of a recognition that in Mississippi, that part of the Gulf Coast, just how bad things were. Do y'all remember that? And do you remember being concerned about, does anybody realize that we're dealing with this as well?
Yes, I definitely felt that way, and there was a part of me that felt that way not because they didn't need help in New Orleans. They obviously needed help. There was a devastating circumstance there, but also we had nonstop volunteers from all over the country coming to Mississippi coast. So we weren't forgotten. It's just that most of the national media was focused on what was going on in New Orleans, and I guess that's understandable in some ways. But we never really had time to. I had those feelings when ultimately we could watch television again and see the reports and start to realize that people weren't really talking about Mississippi much. They were talking about New Orleans. But the truth is, we had nonstop volunteers and lots of help, and we're very grateful for all the attention we received, from a lot of unexpected places.
Okay.
Well, as a guy who sometimes wrestles with OCD, it was kind of irritating to, when you knew that the hurricane actually hit around Pass Christian in that area, and they kept saying the hurricane hit New Orleans, and it was just frustrating, a lot of it. I think New Orleans got a lot of press because it seemed like the state government over there didn't have it together as much as Mississippi's government did, and they were all over it. They just handled it differently.
Right, and it was a mess there, and I think a lot of New Orleans wasn't even the hurricane so much as the levees breaking and being in like a bow and having flood waters
Yeah.
everywhere. So it was just a major disaster. And I'm a journalist, so I'm not meaning to criticize the media because there's only so much you can cover. But it was just, I just remember that aspect of it and wondering kind of what your perspective was at the time. I guess both of you were back pretty quickly to your home churches, and then pretty quickly, Churches of Christ, if we have one strength, that after 15 years of the Christian Chronicle, it seems like disaster relief is one thing that we really do well. And in some ways, I think we kind of fine-tuned that during Katrina, because there was so much need and so many things that were necessary for such a long period of time, that I think, as I think of people who are involved in disaster relief even today, I think a lot of them kind of hone their craft, for lack of a better way to put it, back during Katrina. But what do you two remember about kind of how your churches got involved, how you got involved, what you were doing, maybe what kind of toll that took on you and your families, if any?
I remember distinctly losing a sense of time. This was before help started coming in. I got a phone call from our buddy Danny Dodd just to check on me, and I had gone outside my house to start cleaning up, because this was like, the storm was on Monday. I got home on Tuesday. This was like Wednesday. And I remember being outside for a couple of hours and coming back in and realizing I had never picked up anything, just shell shocked. And I remember people from church saying, we don't need to do anything. FEMA's going to come in and take care of everybody and everything. We just need to just hold tight. I don't know what it was like for you, John, in this regard, but I think my first thing to try to start doing was trying to find people. I think we were 2 weeks or more before we knew if everybody had made it through the storm or not. Maybe even more than that, before we had contact with everybody. Now I've kind of forgotten what your question was, Bobby. I'm sorry.
And I'm trying to remember it too. Hopefully John remembers. Do you remember, John?
Sure. Well, I was thinking, you were asking how did it kind of evolve, how to get into all of this, and like Les, we, when your phones are down and you don't have a landline and you don't have a cell phone and you can't get around town like you'd like to, because first of all, if you run out of gas, you're just out, because there's nowhere to buy gas, and the roads are covered up with debris. You really couldn't get out and check on people. And so there was a period of time there where we had no idea. I could check on people in my neighborhood, but beyond that, we were just, every time we saw somebody from church, we would say, have you talked to anybody else? Because we didn't know. And I remember one of the first times I came to the church building, Ron Webb was in there trying to clean up, and he had just had a pretty significant hernia surgery, and I was so worried that he was overdoing it. And I just was talking with him. Our building had flooded. My house was a block away. It flooded. And we're just sitting there not knowing, like Les, not knowing what to do. And a truck drove up with a horse trailer behind it and it had all these cleaning supplies and had food and I'm like, who told you to come here? How did you know to come here? And they just knew. It wasn't a professional organization. It wasn't. Now, those came along and they were so welcome. But this was just Christian people, and some of them were from Montgomery area. Just were some of the first responders, and they were close enough to get a bunch of stuff together and just head on down. And we just started stocking stuff up, not realizing ultimately our whole church building was going to be packed, every room with supplies, for a couple of years. Wow. We had no idea. If I'd have known, and I always want to say this, that if I'd have known that we were going to be doing that for 2 years plus, I would have started a book and written down the names of all the people who came. I'm sure I don't remember them. Every once in a while I have a flash of, oh yeah, that person was one of I call them Katrina heroes. They came to our rescue. But there are people that I know came and stayed at our church for 3 or 4 weeks, some of them 3 or 4 months, and I don't even know their name. And it's just sad, but I'm so grateful. I have so many good memories of that. But, we had no idea we were going to be doing that. And honestly, we wouldn't, except for one of our elders who was uniquely qualified to make that happen.
And
I kind of got, I was pretty much in charge for a lot of things. We eventually we got more people involved and more help, but I remember feeling a constant sense of being overwhelmed, not sure what to do next. I sometimes tell people in the midst of COVID-19 that I missed the class on pandemic ministry. I learned how to do disaster ministry in Katrina, but it's a whole different animal. It's a whole different animal. One of my memories that has changed my behavior, and you can laugh at this if you want, it's really okay. I am never without at least 2 things of antiperspirant deodorant in my cabinet at home. Because you couldn't get it. I can remember my dad saying, "I'm coming down. Is there anything you need? Please bring deodorant." Because you got tired of smelling everybody else and you sure didn't want to smell yourself. You can laugh, but and it was a long time. It was a long time, years after, before I ever let my would actually let my gas tank get below half a tank before I'd fill up again. Because that's a life altering thing, not to be able to get gas or get the basic necessities you need.
Anything for you, John, that kind of like that, the deodorant or the gas tank, or anything that kind of sticks with you and you maybe even subconsciously don't even remember it 15 years later, but it's still with you?
I'm not really aware of anything like that.
Okay.
But, I can understand it. I'm not aware of anything.
Okay. Well, John, you've written a guest opinion piece for us about some heroes kind of that were involved after Katrina. Maybe give us the Reader's Digest version kind of about, what that article's all about and what inspired you to write it.
Well, it's really, I think everybody who came to Pascagoula would say this same thing, and that is that we could not have done what we did without the leadership of David Kilburn. And David was uniquely qualified to lead us in disaster relief because of a couple of things. And one is he has a servant's heart. He and his wife are well known for the way they serve and love, especially elderly people. And then because he was a part of he worked for the cable system there in Pascagoula, and he was there to build it from the ground up. And so he knew every street. He knew the layout of the whole, part of the county we were in. And it worked in such an amazing way. He knew people in the community very well. And I wrote that article because David is very humble. David and Elaine are super humble people. There's no way on earth they would ever write an article about themselves. They probably don't even appreciate that I did. But I wanted to show that appreciation, because when I think back about the couple of years after Katrina and the ministry that happened in Pascagoula, I cannot separate it from David and Elaine Kilburn. What I learned from him, watching him, is still resonates with me. And I think so highly of him. And I wanted to share that as a part of it. It wasn't really my Katrina story when I wrote about it. It was more trying to relate, what did I see in the Kilburns, and I hope that people would look at that and realize that, we're all influential, but in a moment of crisis, when we step up to the front and say, "Hey, here's what we can do," it influences and impacts everybody around us. And so I would be hard pressed to think that there'd be anybody who came to volunteer in Pascagoula who didn't walk away saying that David Kilburn is one amazing person. And he really is, but, you know, he would never say it.
Les, you were talking about something that you didn't really develop. And I mean, I don't know how directly it relates to this conversation, but I was curious. You talked about not having pandemic training, and, you know, we're obviously, I guess a disaster would be a crisis and a pandemic would be a crisis, but kind of how are these situations different? And I'm curious how you guys are doing and your churches are doing during this current crisis that we're in.
From my perspective, this pandemic, while it has physical effects, obviously, it's really stressing people out mentally and emotionally. You know, the loss of the norms, the lack of control, the feeling like you can't do what you're accustomed to do. But the hurricane was more physical. You know, there were immediate physical needs that people needed to have met, and it, you know, for guys who like to get busy and fix things, which most of us do, that afforded us opportunities to help people and take care of people and fix things. And so much about this pandemic we can't really fix. You know, we're just riding this thing out, wondering what's going to happen, how it's going to play out, what's going to happen next. You know, I remember a correlation between the two. John, you probably remember how often we heard people say, this is our new normal after Katrina, you know, a new normal. And for a long time, every conversation, it seemed like was cast in the guise of this happened before the hurricane, this happened after the hurricane, you know. And so you had these definite delineations in time, you know, before, after. And I think we'll probably get to that point with COVID-19, but right now we're right in the middle of it, and it's not going away anytime soon. And so we just have to try to figure out what it's going to mean for our future. If you'll allow me, one of the things that was striking for me in Gulfport after Katrina was our inability to know where we were going. And you may laugh about that and think, what is he talking about? I mean, literally, there were no road signs. You know, things were all gone. The landmarks that you knew to take a right at weren't there anymore. And so it caused us to have to really relearn how to navigate. And I think that's what tragedies and pandemics do. They cause us to learn how to re-navigate. And in that regard, the hurricane and the pandemic are similar, because we're having to relearn how to navigate our culture, our churches, and life in general. Sorry, I didn't mean to preach.
Well, you are a preacher. John, any thoughts?
I was thinking that the primary difference between what happened at Katrina and what's happening now is when you have, like David led us to focus on 10 square blocks around our church building. We knew we couldn't do it all. And then to focus within that area upon the elderly. And maybe those who were going to be overlooked by other people. And so that was our focus. And we knew what to do. We knew what had to be done. You look around, you can go down the street. Here's a house. It was flooded. It has to be gutted. It has to be emptied. And the people have to be cared for and loved. There's no question mark about what do we do next. I think the big question mark right now with COVID is, what do we do next? Who do you believe? And you got in your church people who, and in your community, people who think, oh, it's not a big deal. I see people saying, watch it disappear in November. You know, it's all a hoax. And other people who are afraid to step outside their door and don't know who to listen to. And so everybody kind of picks their source or their perspective and runs with it. I guess you have to do something. You have to pick one source or another. And so it's unclear what to do. I mean, I think it's clear from my perspective what we all need to do. but I hear other Christians and friends who take a totally different approach. So I think the pandemic is quite different. It is disorienting, as Les said, but I think it is quite different. And there's no one thing you can do that you can see has made a difference. But after Katrina, I could get with a group of people and we could gut a house and look at that big pile of stuff and say, you know what, this house is ready now for the next step. And so you felt like you were actually doing something. I feel kind of helpless with the COVID, actually.
Yeah.
Well, we have a couple more minutes. Let me ask one final question. I'm curious whether anniversaries like the 15th anniversary of Katrina, is that something that would be on your mind this week and something you would be thinking about, if not for a Christian Chronicle friend calling and saying, hey, can we talk about this on Zoom? Is this something that 15 years later is still this time of year you're thinking about it and reflecting on it, or kind of what, if anything, does this anniversary time mean for you guys?
I probably would have eventually got there. I may not have gotten there till the day of, but it is something I remember. It has formed, it shaped and formed us, and it's something that comes out in conversations. It comes out in sermon illustrations. I remember something from Katrina. It's kind of like, John and I both, of course, our personal tragedies otherwise, and those things, they've just shaped and formed us, and they're part of who we are. They gave us some of our experiences, and some helped us learn how to do ministry in ways that college, and John and I were roommates in college. It gave us training that college never could have. So yeah, I think about it.
And you
I do, with especially with Facebook, keeping connections that you might have otherwise lost.
Mm-hmm.
All the friends and different people I got in touch with that I'm still in touch with. People like Keith Wood at IDES, when he worked for IDES is when I met him. And I could go on. Lynn Griffith, who recently passed away, tennis coach at Lipscomb. These are people that, I see their names come across my Facebook feed. I recognize them as people connected with that experience in Katrina. And so I wrote my friend Chris Lockhart last night, just thinking about all this. And I remember Chris worked in Mobile, and he had a day off every Friday. And I don't know how many months, every Friday he spent his day off with me. And he just said, I'm here to do whatever you're doing. If you're doing nothing, I'll do nothing. If you're here to work, I'll work, whatever. But I'm here to just hang out with you. And just, Al Sturgeon in Ocean Springs.
Mm-hmm.
All across the coast. I hate to start naming names because we'll leave people out. Charlie over at Bay St. Louis. There were so many people working, and so many things that happened. And those memories, they come all the time. And they're just a part of who we are as survivors. So let me say, I'll try to tell this real quick. Roger Mills was preaching in Biloxi at Rodenberg, where Bill Denton is now. Bill was a special friend. Somebody in his church gave us a camper, and Cecil May drove it down and parked it in our driveway, and we never knew who gave us a camper to live in. It was amazing, and I'll never forget that. But Roger Mills was preaching, and we used to have a preachers meeting together before Katrina. And we had a good group and a lot of camaraderie. And Roger was by far the oldest among us. And Roger, and Les will agree with this, I can't tell you 50 times, probably 50 times, he told us a story about being in Homestead, Florida, when Hurricane Andrew came across. And he told the church, he said, don't worry. The Church of Christ will take care of us. And he said, I don't remember how much money they got. It was over $1 million. And he said, people couldn't believe, but I knew it was going to happen. And so he had that faith, you know. He told us that story, and we used to kind of laugh about it a little bit. Like, how many times are we going to hear this Andrew story? I mean, we heard this Hurricane Andrew 100 times. And then after Katrina, he said, I've had enough. He moved back to Florence to get away from the seacoast. But how many times has somebody heard me talk about Katrina? And I finally understood. It becomes a part of who you are. And so many conversations and Bible verses and Bible classes. And I tell the church all the time here, you know, don't let me get started telling these Katrina stories, because they don't ever stop. They just, one reminds me of the other. And so Roger's with the Lord now, but he might be telling the Lord about that Hurricane Andrew story. But I knew then that's why he kept telling us that story.
That's so true.
Unless you briefly referenced tragedies that you and John have endured since Katrina. John, you lost your son. Les, you lost your wife and your son, both tragically. And if anyone watching this, if you haven't read Les's book, it's a great book. So I'm sure that's still available to purchase somewhere. Am I right, Les?
Yes, sir. It's on Amazon. You can get it through Leakwood.
Wrestling with Faith, is that the name? Or remind me of the name of the book?
Still wrestling, faith renewed through brokenness.
Okay, still wrestling, faith renewed through brokenness. Okay. Guys, I really appreciate it. It's always good to talk to you. You always, last 15 years, it seems like we've been able to get to know each other a little bit and have interviews, sometimes at good times and sadly other times at not so good times, but it's good to connect with you and talk to you. And I guess we
love you, Bobby, and love what you do with Christian Chronicle, and it's so valuable to all the brotherhood, but it's certainly valuable to me personally, and I appreciate the good work you do with that.
Oh, appreciate it, John.
Same here. You have reached out to both of us in very delicate, difficult, hard times, and have been you've ministered to us in doing your job. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, brothers. I appreciate it.